right, everyone, I have the time as 6:04, so we'll go ahead and get started. And this is being recorded so we can make it available to people who aren't able to join tonight. My name is Mike Madrid. I'm the Executive Director for the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, or DEF. And for those who aren't super familiar yet, DEF is a volunteer-run 501c3 nonprofit. But moreover, I think of it as a community and a network that's really one of a kind, with people from all sorts of sectors and backgrounds and professions. So we have public and private sector, military, officer and enlisted, academic, startups, big primes, investors, civil servants. I mean, you name it. So whether you're one of those things or many of them all at once, you'll find like-minded people here with a shared focus. And speaking of focus, our mission is to promote a culture of innovation in the national security community. We do this in a number of ways: by convening events like this one, forging partnerships, and delivering tangible solutions so that we can inspire, connect, and empower a diverse community. A lot of the actions at the ground level within our local communities called Agoras all across the country. In fact, the Hampton Roads Agora just finished an event mere minutes ago, and the San Diego Agora is having an event in a couple hours due to the time zone difference. But we also curate a handful of national level programs as well. And we're always keen to empower our members to launch their own ideas and their own projects within DEF, and to serve as a sort of incubator where we can. So two examples of that recently are the rapidly growing Agitari community of design thinking facilitators, and the Cornerstone series that is being developed to equip emerging entrepreneurs and startups. But really everything we do is we bring it back to our core mission of culture change within national security, and to driving the ecosystem towards a real cultural identity that embodies innovation and entrepreneurship instead of just performing it on the side. So you can join for free as a member at def.org/join. There are a number of ways to get involved, from our events, both physical and virtual, to the Slack workspace, social media groups, our blog, our podcasts. There's a ton, and we are all volunteer run. So if you feel called to serve at that next level, then you can apply to volunteer on our website. That's all I have. I'm really excited for this event. I've been looking forward to it all week. I really believe in what TechCongress is doing. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Travis Moore to do a 5-minute introduction about TechCongress.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much, Mike. It was about 2 years ago that TechCongress sponsored a little happy hour for the DEF DC annual convening, and I met Frank, and we recruited him into our network. So I'm glad to be doing more of this. It's clearly a great sweet spot for the kind of people that we're trying to recruit for the fellowship. So TechCongress, we recruit and place computer scientists, engineers, and other technologists to serve as policy advisors to members of Congress and congressional committees. So when I'm doing the kind of quick pitch on TechCongress, I like to ask people to raise their hands. You can raise your hand on your own if you followed the Zuckerberg hearings 2 years ago, when there we go, we've got a couple hands raised, when he testified before Congress, and that really laid bare what I experienced for 6 years as a congressional staffer, which is that in many cases Congress is just not equipped to legislate on tech issues, and a tech issue is every issue, because tech isn't just a slice of the policy making pie, it's the crust. And it touches financial services and transportation as much as it does healthcare and anything under the sun, national security, of course. So Congress needs more tech expertise. I mean, actually, really quickly, at the staff level, so there are 3,500 legislative staff. In the chat, I want to get from folks a guess on how many of those 3,500 they think have a tech background, have some amount of technical training, some technical training. 40, we got 40, 12%, 12%, 10%, 10%, 53, 3. It's somewhere between 3 and 40. At our current count, it's like 16 or 17. Our vision is that has to change. Tech is rapidly reshaping society, and we need expertise in the building that understand how that's helping, how that's happening, both at the consumer level, both at the economic level, at the national security level. And so we're glad to have built a pipeline in Frank, Katherine, and Nate are great examples of that. To date, we've sent 39 fellows to Congress. They've done things like organize the first hearing on facial recognition, organize the first drafting the first bipartisan bill on facial recognition, revealing that the Russians have been targeting members of Congress and staff on their personal devices and in their Gmail accounts, getting the Open Government Data Act signed into law, which creates a chief data officer at every federal agency and requires all non-sensitive data to be open and machine readable. So really, really great stuff. Right now we have fellows serving in offices like Speaker Pelosi, Senator Rand Paul, the Senate Homeland Security Committee, who else? Senator Warren, Senator Coons, Representative Alyssa Slotkin, who's an up-and-coming freshman member, the House Energy and Commerce minority staff. Nate, your old office, I don't know if you know that yet, but one of our newest is going over there. So we're really, really proud, and I think that speaks sort of volumes as to the program. A couple important details. The stipend is $85,000 annually, paid out monthly with a bunch of other benefits. It's a year-long program. We can talk more about we have a 3-week orientation process. We have a 3-week placement process. You get to pick the office that you go to work for. Frank, Katherine, and Nate can speak to those details, and we can dive into those in the Q&A. But ultimately, we want to fundamentally reshape the arc of your career. And that is what we set out to do. Last thing I'll say is elephant in the room. We are in the middle of several crises. We are in the middle of of crises that hopefully will be unmatched in our lifetimes. That may feel like a reason not to apply. In my view, it's the absolute reason to apply. We actually thought about pausing this fellowship and potentially canceling it. And then we saw that the fellows that had started in January, they were doing things like leading the daily brief now 149 days straight for the number 2 senator on the Republican side. They were drafting provisions in the coronavirus relief bills. They were doing oversight of health data privacy. And this pandemic has accelerated a ton of trends, and it has clearly accelerated the trend of need for technical expertise in Congress. Unfortunately, this is not a remote fellowship. We had a fellow, probably 98% of the start of the fellowship will be remote, but we had a fellow that wrote a bunch of the questions for the hearing 2 weeks ago with the 4 tech CEOs. She had to be in person for that. Sadly, you do have to relocate to Washington for this, but this is we are in a crisis. This hasn't been easy on our fellows, but this is so important. And so I just want to underscore that the coronavirus is not the reason not to apply for this. It is absolutely the reason to apply for this, because your skills and expertise are more needed than ever. So happy to dive into, and I'm sure Frank, Katherine, and Nate can speak to that in the Q&A.
All right, thanks, Travis. So for tonight, I'm Frank Reyes. I'll be your moderator. Look at that, there's a nice poll that just got popped up in there. That's a great poll to get people thinking there. My name is Frank Reyes, once again. I am a former Navy veteran. I served during the 2019 fellowship, and I served in the House Committee on Homeland Security as their tech policy advisor. And so tonight, I'd like to introduce you to both Katherine and Nate, who will introduce themselves. And then we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about the fellowship, have a conversation, and want you all to start thinking about questions you might have. Feel free to start populating them in the chat as we start answering some of these initial questions. And then we definitely want this to be open and have a great conversation with all of you all. So like I said, Frank Reyes, and I'll turn this over to Katherine.
Hi, everyone. I am Katherine Pratt. I was in the Air Force for 4 years. I was in TechCongress in 2018. I was actually the first Congressional Innovation Scholar So I did 6 months where I took a break from my PhD program, and I was a fellow in the office of Susan Del Bene, who's part of the Washington delegation. And I had a bunch of fun. So looking forward to talking about it.
Hi, my name's Nate Wilkins. I was a former Navy SEAL, spent 11 years in the Navy, active duty. I got out late 2018 and started my fellowship 2019 season of Congress. And I spent that time in the House Energy and Commerce Committee.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Catherine. So the first question that I always like to start and to kind of echo Travis's comments is, this is a call to serve. And so the question I have, especially in these times, is, Nate, why did you apply to TechCongress?
Sometimes you got to remind yourself why you did, especially, when the work gets hard. But it's the same reason that, I joined the military was to serve, and I was put on this earth to serve. It's the same reason after the fellowship I ran for the congressional seat in District 50, whether that was a good idea or not, is still about service.
Catherine, how about yourself?
So I came about to tech policy from a slightly different angle in that I left the military and wanted to go into academia. But one of the things I realized is having, sworn an oath to defend the Constitution and working in electrical engineering and particularly neural engineering, there doesn't exist that sort of constitutional protection in the digital domain. So I started getting more involved with Tech Policy Lab at the University of Washington. I also did an internship with the ACLU and sort of really searching out ways that I could apply some of these, constitutional protections in the digital arena from a policy perspective. And so that's how Travis got connected with me through Ryan Kayla with the Tech Policy Lab. And it worked out really well because it was exactly what I was interested in doing. It allowed me a chance to go back and provide additional service from the legislative side, building on a lot of the things that I had done while I was on active duty, but also being able to rely on that technical background. So it was a great sort of mesh of all the experiences that I'd had.
All right, and I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't answer the question too. So as Travis mentioned, how he got linked up with DEF was the same time that I had heard about it. So back in 2018, I had joined DEF in 2017, and Travis gave the pitch of the Tech Congress. And my previous background had been in working in the federal government in the Department of Defense as a civilian after I was active duty. And like many DoD civilians, at this time I was in the private sector, I had definitely understood there was a lot of challenges with Congress. And being in the Department of Defense, you execute policy, and sometimes you wonder why that policy was created or how it was created. And this was an opportunity to first learn about how the policy is being made, but also have a meaningful impact to it. And so I was at a great place in my career in the private sector that I thought this was a really great adventure and also an opportunity to kind of invest in myself. I always say that one of the reasons I joined Tech Congress was to learn and to contribute. And so that was my biggest interest for it. And I was fortunate to be one of the many that was selected. And so Nate happens, if you figured it out, Nate was my a classmate, I guess, in that. So yeah. Actually, I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine, and I want to ask about what your Hill experience was like during your scholarship.
I had a grand time. One of the really interesting things, so I live in Seattle, I'm back here now, and having such a strong interest in tech policy, I was convinced that the only reason that we hadn't passed things like comprehensive consumer data privacy protection and legislation regarding facial recognition is because no one was talking about tech policy in DC. So I drive across country and I show up in DC, and lo and behold, everyone is talking about tech policy. Like, there's so many events and so many people who are interested in it. And it's more the barrier within Congress. And so I sort of made a point to actually just go around and talk to people. So on certain legislative issues, I, make an appointment with a staffer. I'd find out who was on a particular committee or who had already submitted a bill and send them a note, be like, hi, I'm a tech fellow. I would like to learn about this. And it was a great way to learn a lot about the sort of like, what goes on in the background of passing legislation. So finding out like who has the pen, are we waiting on the Senate? Is this a non-starter because of X issues? And so that was super cool. My boss also actually introduced consumer privacy legislation while I was there. So I got to work on that and I got to take meetings with lobbyists and others who were interested in it. And so that was super fun to be able to compare and contrast what people thought about a particular piece of legislation and what people actually were interested in coming out of it. I absolutely loved it. I had sticky notes all over my cube wall. So every time Susan came in, they were in a different rearrangement and we could talk about, the different art, the way that was set up. Definitely felt like, just another member in the office, and it was an absolute blast. I think something Travis had told me was, make sure to use your badge and like walk around. And so, if there was a moment where I could step away, just like walk over to the Capitol and just like start meandering around and seeing all the different hallways and all the art over there. That was also a great experience because you don't, often get that now when you go, if you don't have a badge, you can't get into many places. So I would 12 out of 10 recommend. I had a great time.
Awesome. Nate, how about yourself?
Similar to Catherine's experience, it was, you really took, you didn't want to take your time for granted, and you walked around and got to experience the historical value of Congress and got to see that. When it came to daily work and monthly work and the whole year, I similar to Catherine's at the committee level, very, very busy work. And as a minority office, a lot of the work we had was very reactive. And so you'd have to have your own self-motivation to do proactive work, to go out there and network with DC folks. You network across industries, especially since Energy and Commerce Committee is very jurisdictional, holds a lot of power. And so, a lot of the stuff that you wouldn't know about, you would have to go find out from networking and just going across and seeing different issues that might affect the committee, and doing proactive work in that. We just like Katherine, I worked on privacy legislation, and I got to bring people in for committee hearings. I got to work on veterans issues, and I worked on opioid issues, which was kind of non-tech, but were still technical. For example, how do they track opioids? Well, they might look at a pollen signature, and then each country's got a different pollen signature, so you've thrown tech in there, and you get to educate yourself about a lot of different things there. And we worked on autonomous vehicles, worked on stopping bad robocalls. Technical issues are very bipartisan, and you try to work that angle. And as a tech fellow, you try to be as bipartisan as you can and work on the issues, and not try to get wrapped up in the weeds of the party politics. So.
And Nate, that's a really great point that you bring up. As we know from watching the news, Congress has become hyper-partisan, and there's many issues that are just really hard to engage. But technology, it does have its few red button issues, but for the most part, it is one of those areas where we can definitely work across the aisle. I remember, just as Nate was talking about on the opioid crisis, when I was on the Committee on Homeland Security, I mostly focused on cybersecurity, infrastructure protection, and national security innovation. And when Nate was working on the opioid project, a lot of what comes into this country comes through Customs and Border Patrol. And so CBP officers inspect some of this, and understanding at the same time that DHS-S&T had a challenge.gov event working with the US Post Office and the Science and Technology Directorate to identify opioids moving through the mail system. And that was 100% what Nate was working on. One of the coolest things was that, I would say, unlike other types of engagements you would have on the Hill, you have a cohort that you can leverage and work on projects. So as one class, you can kind of maximize your efforts for the projects you're working on. And so, I mean, my Hill experience I thought was wonderful. I was fortunate to work at in a committee that was in the majority, and so that, as Nate mentioned, affords a little bit more autonomy, because and that's the aspects of the politics. The party in that chamber has kind of sets the agenda. And so I had a great deal of opportunity to work on a handful of projects of biometrics, counter UAS technology, border wall technology, and if you think of the 21 different components within the Department of Homeland Security, and you say where does tech apply, that gives you a lot of work and not enough time to execute the work. And that's also what I would say about the Hill experience is it goes by extremely fast. The op tempo on the Hill is very different from when I worked in the federal government and very different from when I worked in the private sector, because the cycle time is very, very short and there's just so much work to do. And so I appreciated that everybody is providing their best at 100% when on the Hill. And because of that, I kind of want to transition to now that we're kind of post our fellowship. Nate, what do you feel was one of your more memorable experiences, and what have you gained from participating in the fellowship?
One of the things that teaches you to think with in the military teaches you to think in a systems approach, and you take that to the Hill, and it's very helpful when you have to identify advocacy and lobbying groups and what their interests are. And so you learn a lot of the human intelligence side of policy, politics, and even sales, right? Because lobbyists are constantly coming to you, and you have to discern if it's in their interest or the greater interest of the public, or if it's both. And it teaches you a lot of negotiation tactics. And I use those as I transitioned from Congress to running for a congressional seat, and it certainly helped me to identify, whether we were working on technology or we're running for office, similar doctrine can be applied when figuring out how to pass policy issues, especially from the technical side. I hope that that was clear.
Yeah, that's good. How about you, Katherine?
So this is a crazy story. My undergraduate degree is actually in aerospace engineering, and I used to work in the space industry. And we have a lot of companies in Washington, so Blue Origin, Aerojet Rocketdyne, and many others. And Steny Hoyer, who was at the time Minority Whip, wanted to do, or he was doing a tour of America looking at American companies, American jobs, and he decided to come to Aerojet to do a sort of listening tour about aerospace in the state of Washington. And I was like, oh, can I help out? And so it was very much a lieutenant moment of, you may have one task, but if something comes up, you go ahead and do it. So you be making the coffee, you might make the coffee, or hey, there's a 2-star general coming, you need to put the vacuum together to vacuum out the skiff type deal. So wasn't in any way related to the actual work I was doing for TechCongress, but I flew over to Redmond and got to staff my boss at the event. I knew half the people in the room from my previous life. So that was great. And I was the person who took pictures. So I got to run around with the camera and run the Facebook live feed. So totally not actually in sort of the job description of what I thought I'd be doing, but it was an amazing opportunity both to meet the Minority Whip, to be able to involve in this sort of visit in terms of the planning, prepping the Congresswoman for questions, letting her know about different things going on, and even being able to provide some of my own color commentary about, the various people who I knew would be there based on my own experiences. So, that was great. Another one is when we actually introduced the bill for consumer data privacy legislation. It was very strange to know that something I worked on was introduced in the floor of the House. So that was wonderful. And it's, sometimes it's, the little things like the staffers who trade between the offices. So one thing that happens is you can give away, or you can have freebies in your office as long as they come from your state or your district. So we had little packets of cranberries in our office, but people would come in, and so if they had like, like a particular like cheese company or something, you would actually execute trades. So one day, one of the staffers in the office came back, and we had just traded a bunch of little cranberry packets for a ton of like ice cream sandwiches. So, being able to kick back for a couple minutes and eat a bunch of ice cream sandwiches, it was a very human event of like, we're all working our butts off. And we're just going to sit here and enjoy some ice cream. So there's great times for like levity and like bonding with the other staffers. But also just like sometimes sitting back and realizing like the enormity of the work that it is you're doing, is also quite humbling. So, yeah.
I like how you brought in that, the human story, because two of my, one of mine is great experiences happens to do with that, and the other one was just like something totally cool. So we were celebrating a coworker's birthday, and we were fortunate enough that the majority whip's office was very good friends. And if you're not familiar with it, the majority whip in Congress and the House has an office and a very large staff within the Capitol itself. Many congressional personal offices and committee offices are off of the actual Capitol Hill. They're in buildings around it, which also, if you're wondering, you spend not that much time on the actual Capitol. Most of your work is outside the Capitol. If you're wondering. But I remember we were there, we were celebrating their birthday, and one of the staff says, "Hey, there's a secret passage here. We can't say what the room is, on recorded thing, but there's a secret passage here." We're like, "Wait, what?" And we got this like behind the scenes national treasure type of tour of the Capitol, after this person's birthday, and it was beyond cool because of like, oh wow, and like the people who were giving us that behind, who knew the stories of like, the previous members of Congress who would use that, or that area, and you could see like old ashings of like, back from 30, 40, 50 years ago. It was so cool to kind of see the history of previous members of Congress and there. So I thought that for me was like the cool factor of working on the Hill. The second thing that I thought was really cool was I got to go on a CODEL, which is, or a StaffDel, which is a staff delegation trip. And I went to Israel for 11 days during recess. And it's actually very topical right now because like, we went there with the Israeli Defense Force, and we went to the Syrian border of Israel, we went to the Jordan border, we went to the Gaza Strip border, we went into Palestine, and in 2 weeks we got a crash course on the Israeli security posture, and it was just amazing from all the other, because there's a lot of staff members that you normally wouldn't get to meet, but you get to spend 2 weeks. You're sharing a room with them. It was during August recess, so it's like summer camp. We all went to summer camp because we all were being. It was so cool. And actually this week is the one year anniversary. We still keep in touch, a lot of us, on WhatsApp from that staff trip. And so I think it's true to what Katherine said. It's the humanizing aspects of at least my Hill experience that are most memorable for me. So yeah, so as we're kind of transitioning to why everyone here is watching this, is what advice do we all have for those considering applying? So Katherine, I'll throw it off to you to start off.
One of the things I think is definitely being your authentic self. So making sure to describe the things you've done. Feel free to, actually be proud of the things that you've done. A lot of the experiences I think that we bring to the table for a program like this may not be a traditional path. And so being able to explain very clearly and concisely what it is you did and, what you're able to bring, particularly if you have an issue that you wanted to work on. So in my case, it related to my dissertation. I'm very interested in neural security and privacy. So I was able to craft a lot of the application I had based on that, because it's something I'm really passionate about. So making sure that that passion comes through along with your qualifications, and that should be a good start.
Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat what Katherine said, because it all has weight and applicability. I would just say bringing a really good personality to the office, and if and when you do become picked, to find that culture of the office really fits with your personality, because it's going to be a long year if it doesn't.
Yeah, so I've said this to others who've asked me this question, is really be true to what it is you want to be fighting for, because everything you work on the Hill is a battle. So be self-aware with what is your passion and what is most important for you during the experience, and articulate that in your application and during your interviews. Each of us, I think, had mine was national security innovation. That's why I've been with DEF for so long, and I knew some of the challenges, and I realized that there's only so much that we can do from the outside or in the executive branch or in the private sector. How can we shape this from the inside of people who really are making very significant policy decisions? And that was my elevator pitch, was what would be my vision for reshaping national security innovation. And I got the opportunity to do that. I got to work on a DHS Science and Technology Directorate reauthorization bill, and I got to work with a lot of stakeholders to put in a lot of personnel management, recruiting, a lot of the things that DEF expounds into law and policy for that. And I think that's the key, is be passionate and be able to articulate your passion. And to something that Katherine said earlier is where she said sometimes you got to make the coffee and clean up the vacuum. This is a place where you got to be hungry, but you got to be humble too, right? And people value that. People value if you're hungry, if you want to help, if you want to get at it, if you're willing to do anything, because it's those people that get the opportunities to be in the room, right? No matter as Travis will tell you, they recruit some of the best technologists this country has, but we're not above anybody else. And being that humble shows that, hey, this person's a team player. And it's just like when you go into any unit, and so I think that's the advice I would have is, if be honest with your skill sets. If you're great in whatever buzzword technology there is, say that, own it. But also be ready to take on other duties as assigned, as they say, for that. So that would be my advice for it. All right, and then we now have, I guess we'll now be going over to questions. You can start populating any questions you want in the Q&A chat. And then I don't know the Zoom mechanics, because that's not my area of expertise, but if somebody wants to just raise their hand and ask a question, Mike, I'm sure we'll be able to help facilitate that too, right?
I'll help you out if you need it.
Yeah.
Our first question in the Q&A is from Reyes, and it's what traits do you each think make folks the most successful in the fellowship? What make a great fellow versus a good one? And we'll answer that live.
Yeah. Travis, you want to take that one first? Because and there's the thing, none of us, Katherine and I, have anything to do with the selection process. So we'll leave it to Travis to first talk about what makes a great versus a good fellow, and then we'll say what we think makes a good versus great.
I think that sounds like a good plan. So I'm gonna answer two parts of that question. The first thing that makes a fellow, that separates the good fellows from the great fellows, are the ones that show up. And when I say showing up, I mean showing up to anything and everything. Washington is a town where, you know, the currency is relationships. And that is why we're a fellowship model, because Jeff Bezos couldn't get a job in Congress if he wanted one. Not that Congress would maybe necessarily want to hire Jeff Bezos right now, but you need to know all these inside baseball skills. You know, what's the motion to recommit? Who's the junior senator from Idaho? What's the suspension calendar? You can't learn that but on the job. And a lot of that's intangible learning too. And so showing up, and I mean, Frank, Katherine, Nate, you all did a tremendous job of this. You know, you'd show up to events. We'd have, you know, there's a woman, Coach Kemper, and she organizes these great events with like deputy CTOs and Vince Cerf, and they're all at the embassies. And, you know, Frank and Nate were there, and you get to have a conversation with Vince Cerf. It's pretty cool. And there are briefings on the Hill, there are receptions on the Hill. A lot of it's virtual now. I really hope that early 2021 this changes, but showing up proverbially, really, really important. The other thing that the best fellows do is they figure out what the member already cares about based on their biography or their constituency, and they manage to package whatever they care about in that thing. So I'll give you one example. We had a fellow in 2018, Buki Adebayo, who's working for Senator Udall. You know, it turned out Senator Udall, he wasn't traditionally super passionate or active on tech, but you know what he cared about? He cared about kids. And so she was really active on COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy work. And I think that's a great example of like figuring out a way, like figuring out the things that you care about and finding the relevance to the member is a super important skill.
Katherine, anything you want to add?
Yeah, this is really similar to what Travis said, but being able to think like a constituent really helped me out. So Susan has a very broad district. It goes from, you know, east side of Lake Washington and sort of the Seattle area all the way up to the border. And so you have a lot of tech, but you also have a lot of farming. And so if you wanted to talk about a tech issue, it's almost how do you frame it so that these two very different types of constituents could have the same reaction so she could sell it to all of them. And just the, you know, going back to, you know, weird military things of like that training of like anticipating what the commander wants. And so maybe, you know, reading all of the different news feeds that come out in the morning, being able to stay on the ball. I actually was in Susan's office, and the first week was when Brad Smith, who's the president of Microsoft, released a memo saying, government should regulate government use of facial recognition. And so at one of the first staff meetings I went in, Susan's like, everyone read that memo, and we're like, yep. She's like, we should have a response. And it was like, cool, I have, you know, here's, you know, I've already thought about it. Give me a day, I'll type up a 3-page memo, and being able to hand it to you and sort of anticipating what the next thing is going to be, so that when there is a question, you already have that answer ready, or you at least know enough about it that you can go off and, you know, type it up and send her a quick email. So
I think that's, Katherine said so succinctly, is those individuals that can think about the second and third order effects and anticipate what's going to be asked next are the ones that I think, you know, when you're talking to people, when you ask them a question, but that they're able to extrapolate, okay, then this is what I need to be prepared for. It's the third level deeper down what those impacts are. And so much of what at least my work was, or I saw other staff, is you do a lot of prep work and very little of that actually gets to see the light of day. But it is that prep work that you might have like 2 or 3 things you're working on, as in like, I've kind of drafted a response to X, or I see this news thing, I'm gonna have something ready in the queue. So if like the boss asks, I'm gonna be able to cut that right over and get it ready to them. That takes a lot of planning and work that will never see the light of day, right? You might have 10 of these, and you might be lucky that like it's the one that the boss happens to ask a question about, and you're like, here you go. But the other 9 go away because they're no longer relevant. They become OBE pretty quickly. And so I think that makes a really great fellow. Let's see, we're gonna move on to another question in the interest of time. All right, we'll do Lassen. I think I pronounced that correctly. It was mentioned in a previous conversation that some of the fellows pursue degrees during their fellowship. My challenge is I'm a first year in my MBA. I would consider engaging the administration to accommodate my last semester, Jan through May 2021. If I were fortunate to be selected, the question is whether that framework would even be feasible in the final year. So I think the question is, Travis, could someone be working on their MBA, I would assume remotely, while also being part of the fellowship?
So let me answer depending on how remotely, if you would want to participate doing your MBA remotely during the first little bit, assuming it's off hours, that's fine. And we've had fellows that have been pursuing degrees during the program at night. The other thing that I would say is that, and I think this addresses maybe another question up here that was about years of experience, is that we have a parallel program. We have two fellowship programs: our Congressional Innovation Fellowship, which is meant for mid-career, so 5 years plus. Though, and this will address another question. We've had our first fellow, J.C. Cannon, had spent 6 years at startups and 20 years at Microsoft and 6 years on the flight deck of aircraft carriers. Like he had plenty of experience. He was like 30 plus years. So we've had some later, kind of 5 to even later career. That's our Innovation Fellowship. Our Innovation Scholars Program, of which Katherine was our first, is meant for early career and just finishing school. And so kind of 1 to 3 years of experience or finishing a master's or a PhD. And we've got 6 of them that have just started. They're fantastic. And so we've basically got 2 kind of starting lines. And if you're in a degree now, it sounds like you'd be a great fit for the, and especially if you're finishing in May or June, great fit for the Innovation Scholars Program, which we'll start recruiting for probably, Lena and I were talking about it today, in like late November.
All right. We have another question here. Actually, it'll be a 3-parter question. And then we have a follow-up to the previous question, is that they'll be finishing up school. They already have a JD, and this is just a second master's with some experience. So they just went back. So
So sounds like you've got lots of experience and you'd be qualified for this program, so you should apply.
all right. Another question is there an upper age limit? Which I don't believe so, right, Travis?
No,
Yeah.
and I just point to JC. I mean, JC, who is phenomenal, such a great guy, and wanted this to be the capstone of his career. We also had a fellow last year, Maggie Molina. Maggie was 15, 18 years into her career. We look for a diversity of experience. We want some folks that are mid to late career. We want some folks that are kind of early mid career in the Innovation Fellows program. So, so definitely apply.
All right. Another question we have here, and it's more, I guess, towards the fellows, is how did your career change after the fellowship? So anyone want to jump in on that, Nate or Katherine?
I can go first. So I was finishing grad school, and it actually was really helpful, more in a sense of where to impact technology. So I tried the legislative route. That was maybe a little slow. And so I came back and finished grad school, and through network that I have out here, I was actually able to get a job at Microsoft, and I actually work on ethics and policy on a team out here. And so it was a great transition because I'm actually working directly with the product teams, and it was a much quicker. It's a much quicker way to influence the product lifecycle and getting the actual people developing the tech to work on it versus waiting for legislation to come down. But one of the really interesting things that has come from it is being able to continue to watch the bills that are being introduced, the dialogue that's happening in DC, and translating it back into the work that we're doing on the team that I'm on. And so I actually gave them a presentation a couple of weeks ago, like this is Congress 101, sort of lifting up the curtain so people can, understand what it's like to be a staffer and sort of be able to read the tea leaves. Like it's very strategic who's introducing bills. It's very strategic who's actually signing on. You can see whether or not there's support for the various things that people are doing based on who's talking about it. And a lot of people were like super excited about this because they then were able to have a new perspective on a lot of the tech dialogue that's happening, and understanding the types of questions that are asked in a congressional hearing have many different meanings, and sort of being able to explain how processes at such a high level could actually have an impact for us, just as program managers and devs and engineers at a company like Microsoft. So it has returned rewards many times over for both myself and my colleagues, because I'm able to bring back and share with them.
Yeah, I think it certainly sets you up really well in the commercial sector. It depends on, how well you network and what are your goals after the fellowship. It's something certainly to think about before the fellowship. And while you're out in the private sector, it sets you up to go into law, sets you up to go into product management, because you'd have to manage all these legislative issues, and there's just different things that if you wanted to do. I was a little bit more entrepreneurial, and I felt that I'd be best used at the top of Congress, and it also helped TechCongress as well. But anyways. I dropped right into a district, in a political district, and I was able to intake all the information, the local issues really quickly, and go into debates really well prepared. Because I had worked as a journalist on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, I understand jurisdictions, and then you just kind of zoom in from there, and you're able to intake all that information and pretty much beat your opponents in a debate. However, there comes in some political games and some things to think about when you run for office. However, I took that experience and I became an independent consultant, and I've become very entrepreneurial. So that's my career trajectory.
And for myself, I actually took the first 3 months of this year off. It kind of goes to one of the questions we had of what was the experience like for work and family.
Perfectly timed, by the way, Frank.
Yes. I took the last trip you could take. So I was gone from January to mid-March, and got back March 15th, and apparently it was a whole different world after that. I had the fortune to circumnavigate South America, because the Hill was one of those things. Is if to Travis' point, if you've got to show up to know, and if you are going to go 100% into the program, it does take a lot of time. It is really a commitment you make. And so for me and my family, we wanted just to kind of decompress, and so I took 3 months off. And when I got back in March 15th, I was on the job search. And as you would imagine, trying to find a job in the weeks when people are closing down and shutting down operations around the country could be a bit challenging. But because of my network that I made through my work in the committee, I was able to link up with a wonderful think tank out of NYU Law, and that's where I'm at right now. I support the Brennan Center for Justice on election security technology. And so that, I think that in itself is, being a technologist and saying, hey, I'm going to, apply for a job. It was really would have been extremely challenging had I not had that network. And there's a great quote by Megan Smith, who is the former US CTO, and she has this saying that goes, go where you're rare to be valuable. And so I've been, where I'm at is I work with a group of legal scholars and former elections officials, and I'm the single technologist on the team. And so that has really, and that also sets you apart. Technologists that understand tech law, tech policy are very, very rare in the ecosystem. That can I had a conversation with a lawyer, and I was like, "Hey, I'm not a lawyer, but I've worked with a lot of lawyers," and they're like, "Wow, you seem to be able to speak both worlds pretty well of jurisdictional understanding." That's what you'll get. You'll understand what USC Code 13 does, and so understanding Title 10, Title 50, Title 23 authorities, and what that all means, and all the jargon that Travis was talking about, like an amendment in the name of substitution, or how do you get certain things, like having that, what we would call legislative bureaucracy hacking, is very valuable, and it's a very unique skill that you get after it, and certain companies definitely seek that, because you can talk tech, you can talk the federal government and governance structure, and so much more. And especially if you're a veteran, you come from a position of service, because you care about the betterment of Americans through your public service. So that in itself, those three things make you highly marketable outside posts. So it's always it's one of those champagne problems you have, is you get to choose what you want to do afterwards. All right. Travis, I think this one's up for you. If you submit an application, what is the timeline for next steps?
So I just shared a blog that we wrote last year about what our selections process looks like, which we'll probably update this year closer to the deadline. But let me answer in a slightly different way, just to talk about what we're looking for, because we select on 4 key criteria. First is technical ability. So you do need to have some technical training. I mean, that could range from having done a couple boot camps to Katherine having a master's and a bachelor and a master's and a PhD, and having served in a technical capacity in the military. And kind of everything in between. But you do need to have some technical ability, because that's what we need more of in government. 2 is tech translation skills. So you're going to need to be able to explain, like, what happens when a cell phone makes a call to a member of Congress that may still be using like a flip phone, or what happens when you type a word into Google and how a Google search works. These are the kinds of things that you're going to have to be explaining to a septuagenarian or an octogenarian, or maybe someone in their 40s or 50s, depending on who you go to work for. But tech translation. 3rd is ability to work on teams in an entrepreneurial way. So we're looking for a history of your ability to do that. And then 4th, and most importantly, I said this in the outset, we want to fundamentally change the arc of your career. So we want to see your vision for how you're going to use the platform that you have. You're going to be reporting to, you might be reporting to the Speaker of the House. You're going to have a warren.senate.gov or a paul.senate.gov email address. These are email addresses that go a long way. How are you going to use that platform to become the leader that can bridge both of these sectors? So that's what is most important to us. And what we saw in Frank and Katherine and Nate was that it was a true values-based belief that these sectors need to be bridged, and strong ideas for how they want to use the experience. So
Travis, can I give an example of what you're talking about?
Please.
So you can use your email, your title, working as a fellow of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where we're looking at privacy issues. And I was able to bring the founder, co-founder of the California Consumer Privacy Act to the Hill to testify. And that's the type of thing that you can connect. And we're supposed to have a call, hopefully she calls me, about what they're doing on some of the propositions in California here soon. So that you're able to take your network, leverage it, get them on the Hill, if you have that ability, and then keep in touch with them after the fellowship.
All right, so it looks like we're almost coming up to time. We've got about 2 minutes, so I want to leave each a minute left in closing for one for Travis and one for our gracious hosts, Mike and Def. So Travis, I'll give you the second to last word.
So I'll just repeat what I said at the outset, which is that we are living through really unprecedented times, and multiple crises layered, and the worst set of crises that we've dealt with in 3 generations. Congress went 6 weeks without a committee hearing on any of these crises because it did not have the capacity to have an event like on Zoom like this. And that is an indication, that's about its digital infrastructure, but the same is true in terms of its knowledge of how technology is working. This is an entire branch of government, and the coronavirus, this is not going to be a regular fellowship. It's going to be harder. It's going to be different. You're not going to be able to go to the Taco Bell reception, at least at the beginning, and eat free tacos. But it's, for that reason, it's even more important. We have seen just how important and relevant the skills of the fellows have been during all of this. And so if you have a call to serve, your country needs you. And so if you're on the fence, put your application in. If you're having imposter syndrome, everyone that's worked on the Hill has imposter syndrome. Throw your hat in the ring. We really, really, really need your expertise. And so I really hope we'll see your application.
Well, that's really inspiring. I'm not going to try to top that. In fact, I'm going to parlay part of my last minute back to Travis and just ask for those who are listening live, but also for those who consume this later, besides the fellowship and applying to be a fellow or the innovation scholar that you talked about earlier, what other ways can people in the deaf community and beyond support the work that you're doing and support TechCongress?
Great question. So first and foremost, I should mention Katherine and Nate and Frank all came to us through referrals. Frank through Deaf, Katherine through one of her faculty members, Nate through the Special Forces community. We find our fellows through referrals, and we've also decided we want to put our money where our mouth is and award people that refer us to the candidates that we want, which are underrepresented people of color, women, and veterans. So if you nominate or refer us to a candidate who then becomes a fellow from one of those communities, we're going to write you a check for $500. So first and foremost is helping, spreading the word, help us spread the word. We've written $4,500 worth of checks over the last year or so, and I'd love for all of our checks to have, or all of our fellows to have checks attached to them. And then secondly, when fellows join, bringing resources and networks to them, we really need new ideas, new expertise. We need new witnesses at committee hearings. We need participating in the deaf community. I think it's just, we need to be supporting one another. That's a more kind of vague answer to that. But, Frank's one of our alumni, and he's like, we should organize some recruiting events for vets. And so we're doing it. That entrepreneurialism, that is what is going to solve this in Washington, is entrepreneurial people that aren't afraid to think outside the box and build things. Because too often people in Washington are just following orders and like checking boxes, and we need people to create. So think about how you can create.
Well, that's a great answer. So thanks, Travis. Thanks, Alina. And thanks to our 3 alums and speakers, Frank, Katherine, and Nate. It'll be easy to follow up with any of these people on LinkedIn, I assume, and the Deaf Slack as always. Thanks for tuning in tonight, and hope to see you soon. Have a good night, guys.
Good night. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.